Thank you everyone for joining. We will get started here shortly, but I do want to go over some instructions for accessing some of our interpretation channels. If you would like to access our Spanish language channel, you simply open the interpretation menu. If you're accessing through a desktop or laptop, this should be at the bottom of your screen. There's a toolbar across the bottom, and there's a small interpretation icon. Simply click on that, select your preferred language, and then if you would like to not listen to the original audio, you can go ahead and click the mute original audio. If you're on an iPad, you'll see that 3-dot icon, same with your iPhone. Go ahead and click that 3-dot icon, open it up, and you should see the interpretation option in there. Click on that, and then again, select your preferred language.
Vamos a comenzar en un momento más. Mientras tanto, vamos a dar unas cuantas instrucciones para que puedan escoger el idioma seleccionado si así lo requieren. Si están conectándose por medio de una laptop y quieren escuchar el idioma español, pueden poner el cursor en la parte de abajo de la pantalla para ver la barra de herramientas y hacer clic en el icono que dice interpretación. También tienen la opción de silenciar el audio original y esto es haciendo clic en mute. Por otro lado, si quieren conectarse por medio de un iPad o de una tableta, pueden presionar los 3 puntos del menú arriba a la derecha y seleccionar Language Interpretation y seleccionar español. O si están conectados en un teléfono, en un iPhone, por ejemplo, pueden presionar los 3 puntos del menú en More, abajo a la derecha.
Thank you. We also have a sign language access channel as well. So again, if you would like to access that sign language channel, same instructions as before, you'll open that interpretation menu. If you're on a desktop or laptop, just hover at the bottom of your screen. You should see a toolbar across the bottom. Click that interpretation icon. If you're on an iPad or an iPhone, you will see that 3-dot icon either in the upper right corner or the lower right corner of your screen. Again, click that interpretation channel, and then you can select under Watch and then choose the sign language channel for viewing. A floating window should appear on your screen with the interpreter you've chosen, and then you can resize or move that screen as needed. Again, if you would like to turn that off at any time, simply click that interpretation icon again, and that'll turn that sign language off. And again, we're just giving folks a few minutes to hop on. I know we've got a couple of attendees. We'll probably get started in just another minute or so. So just sit tight and we will begin shortly.
Good evening, everyone. Looks like it's about 6:04, so we'll go ahead and get started. I know some folks may still be joining us, but I'd like to introduce myself. I'm James Castaneda. I am the Transit Services Manager here for the City of Tucson Department of Transportation and Mobility. I would like to thank everyone for joining us here tonight for our virtual public meeting regarding the Sun Systems Comprehensive Operational Analysis. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to thank some of our key staff and personnel involved in this effort, beginning with Department of Transportation and Mobility here at the City of Tucson under the leadership of Director Sam Credio. We have SunTran staff under General Manager Steve Spade. We also have our partners at PAG and RTA. Our project is led by our project consultants, TMD, under Project Manager Melissa Sather. our public outreach consultants under project manager Christy Shepard, and of course, all the community here joining us tonight to talk about this very important and crucial analysis we're doing regarding our transit system. So with that, I will get things started and pass the mic over to Melissa to get us started. Thank you again.
Thank you, James. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your night to hear a little bit about our project. I think actually Christy is going to start with some information on how to use the Zoom platform.
Yes. Thank you, Melissa. So just a reminder, I know we went over these instructions briefly as folks hopped on. I'll go over them just once more. If you would like to access that Spanish language channel, you can go ahead and open that interpretation menu. If you are on a desktop or laptop, you will find that interpretation button. If you hover down at the bottom of your screen, there'll be a toolbar. You can click that button. If you're on an iPad or on an iPhone, you can simply click that three-dot icon. And that will open up a menu for you and you can select interpretation. From there, you select your preferred language, in this case, the Spanish language. And then if you would like to mute the original audio, if you just click that open again, you'll see the option to mute original audio. In addition to Spanish interpretation, we're also offering a sign language channel as well. Again, follow those same instructions through the interpretation menu. And then underneath that interpretation dropdown, you will see an option that says watch. You can choose sign language channel for viewing and a floating window will appear on your screen. You can resize or move that screen as needed. If you want to turn off the sign language channel at any time, again, simply click that interpretation icon and then click sign language off and that will turn it off. A couple of items while we get started. While we're on our interpretation channel note, we are making sure that we can accommodate those interpreters. So there may be a slight delay in our presentation. So if we are paused for a second, it's just to allow our interpreters to catch up to where we're at in the presentation. So just keep that in mind. All participants have been muted to avoid background noise. This meeting is being recorded and this will be available on the website at www.tucsoncoa.com. So if you want to view it following the meeting, we will have this meeting recorded and on there. And then following the meeting presentation, we will take questions and comments online and by phone. As we get started, I just want to give you a couple of instructions on how to use Zoom and how we'll be taking questions and comments. If you would like to ask a question at any time, you can use that chat feature. It is at the bottom of your screen. You should see that chat icon at the bottom. You can click that and type your question in for us. And we will be going through and monitoring that during the presentation. So when we get to the Q&A, we can go ahead and read those out loud to the group. If you would like to participate and just ask a question verbally, you can also do that by raising your hand. To participate that, you can just simply click that raised hand icon underneath your reactions. There's a little reaction button at the bottom of your screen. Again, click that raised hand, that'll give us a notice. And then at that time, we can unmute your line and that way you can ask your question live. If you are joining over phone, you can press *9 on your phone. That'll give us that raised hand and it will allow us to ask that question verbally. We'll give you permission to speak. And if you would like to ask your question, simply press that *6 on your phone. That'll give us the unmute, and that way you can ask your question live. And we will go over these instructions again, but just wanted to give you a heads up as we move into our presentation, but we will go over those briefly following the presentation.
All right, thank you, Christy. So a little bit of background about the project. So the City of Tucson, in partnership with the Pima Association of Governments, is completing a comprehensive operational analysis, or a COA, of Sun Tran, Sun Link, Sun Express, and Sun Shuttle services. And it's essentially looking at all aspects of the transit services, the access, the equity, to develop recommendations for improving the value, efficiency, and performance of the current transit options. Next slide. So in terms of the project timeline, we spent the fall collecting a lot of data about who rides and the ridership patterns, looking at the population, demographics, and land use patterns within the region. And right now we're collecting, through the public outreach effort, collecting a lot of input on the different priorities for improvements to the system. We're going to be taking all of the information that we collect and use it to develop a set of guiding principles or strategies, and then using these strategies to create some draft service recommendations. We'll be coming back and sharing these recommendations in terms of route changes with the public, with riders, probably late summer, later this year. And then we'll be collecting feedback on those proposed changes and turning those draft changes into a final service plan recommendation. Next slide. So currently, Sun Systems operates a number of different services throughout the Tucson region. We do have a couple of interactive polls today. This one's just a bit of an icebreaker poll, asking if you currently use any of the following transit services offered in Greater Tucson. So you should see a poll pop up. So, please let us know if you use any of these services. So Sun Tran is, the daily bus service along 29 different fixed routes. Sunlink is the streetcar service near downtown in the University of Arizona. Sun Express is a fast commuter transportation option with fewer stops. Sun Shuttle, smaller bus option serving more suburban and rural communities. And the Sun Shuttle Dial-A-Ride, which is a curb-to-curb service for those traveling within a designated zone. Collectively, all of these services support almost 60,000 rides a day within the city and Greater Tucson area. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, sharing the results. So you should be able to see the results. So for everyone who responded said that they currently ride SunTran, most ride Sunlink, and some ride Sun Shuttle Dial-A-Rides. We've got a good variety of people using the different services that Sun Systems offers. All right, next slide, please. So for the goals of the project, we want to identify opportunities to improve the efficiency, effectiveness, and equity of current transit options. We want to enhance the transit system to better support the needs of the community, and then propose recommendations for future service changes or expansions. So the next couple of slides will show you a little bit about the type of information that we're evaluating as part of this project. The first is we want to have an understanding of who rides transit. And so this data came from an onboard survey that was conducted in 2022. And we learned that 72% of riders use the system at least 5 days a week. So most people are relying on it every day to get where they need to go. 58% have incomes less than $25,000. 50% come from zero vehicle households. So lack of access to a private automobile is a major driver, no pun intended, in someone's reason for using transit. 14% of riders are university and college students, and this is specifically for Sun Tran. It's a lot higher for Sunlink. And then 9% of riders are K through 12 students, and a fair chunk of riders transfer at least once as part of their trip, which is what we'd expect to see with the grid type system that Sun Tran operates. Next slide. We're looking at also when people travel. And so with location-based services and cell phone data, we have a lot more information now about all travel that's happening within a region. And so the blue lines in the chart are showing transit trips when people are traveling on SunTran or Sun Shuttle services. And you can see a lot of the trips are really happening between that typical, 9 to 5 commute time, with the greatest activity at 3 in the afternoon when schools and classes are getting out. The yellow is showing the general purpose trips made by car. And you can see that the time of day distribution for car trips is a lot different. You have a peak in the morning when people are commuting to work, but then a lot of activity happening later in the evening, after work, after school, as people are running errands or socializing, engaging recreational activities. So there's this mismatch between when people are riding transit and then when people are traveling in general. So one of the things we'll look at is whether Sun systems should vary the operations from the current schedules to travel at different times to better meet the needs of the community. Next slide. We're looking also at the levels of service that are available. So the map on the right shows how often service is operating on different parts of the network. So the darker the green, the more frequently service is operating. And most SunTran routes operate at regular intervals of every 15, 20, 30, 60 minutes throughout the day. And those levels are consistent. There's not a lot of peaking in the morning and afternoon. The frequencies are generally the same throughout the day. And that's really convenient for riders who can remember, kind of the schedule, and it's very predictable. If we shift to the next slide, we can animate it. So now we're looking at weekend service or Saturday midday service. And you can see that the frequencies dropped significantly. Where there was a lot of greens and yellows on weekdays, we're now seeing a lot of oranges. Service is operating every 40 to 60 minutes. And this is because service levels dropped considerably on weekends, offering roughly half the amount of service. So one of the things we'll look at is whether there's additional demand for weekend service and if it should more closely match weekday service. Next slide, please. We want an understanding of where people are traveling. So this map shows average weekday boardings by stop. The larger the circle, the more people getting on at that stop. So it shows us where the bus routes are currently carrying the most riders, where there's higher and lower demand for service, and we can see what types of destinations are generating transit demand as well. And so this project will look at redesigning routes to better serve some of these high demand destinations. Next slide. We're also looking in general at where people travel. And so that location-based service data from a platform called Replica shows us how people travel throughout Greater Tucson. So the lines on the map are showing the origin destination patterns of all the trips happening in the region. So the darker, thicker purple lines, that means there's a lot of trips happening between these zones. And so by looking at what these major origin destination pairs are, we can look at redesigning routes to provide faster, more direct connections between these origins and destinations. Next slide. We also want to understand how riders are using the system today. What we found from the ridership data is that the top 5 SunTran routes, routes 16, 8, 4, 11, and 18, account for 33% of all riders. So 1 in 3 riders are on just these 5 routes. So if we can make these 5 routes operate, really well, it'll benefit a huge portion of riders. It's even higher than 33% when you account for all the people transferring to and from those routes. Sunlink alone accounts for 10% of system-wide ridership. And the chart at the bottom shows the percent of system ridership carried by each type of service compared to the percent of the system revenue hours. So the SunTran frequent transit network, routes operating every 20 minutes or better all day, those routes carry almost 52% of riders on a daily basis, but they only use 44% of the system hours, which means there are more passengers being carried per hour that's being invested. This is a higher performing service. There's a positive return on investment. Whereas with the non-frequent routes, you're carrying 37% of the riders, but using 44% of the resources. And so here there's an opportunity to see if we can increase ridership or make those services more efficient, so the numbers get a bit more in balance. Next slide. So now we're starting to get into the poll questions a bit more. So we want to know which of the following is the most important to you when considering whether to use public transit. Now, obviously, a lot of these are going to be important. You might, you have to have service that's nearby, and the timing has to work for you, and it has to be time competitive. But we just want to know which is the most important to you. And please feel free to use the chat to let us know why you responded the way that you did, or if you really wanted to pick two and you were stuck between two, please use the chat and let us know kind of why you made your choice. So hopefully everybody's seeing the poll, starting to see answers come in. So yeah, frequency of service is, how often the bus is coming, the hours of operation being, the start and the end times during the day, the number of transfers you have to make on the trip, how long your trip takes from start to finish, the availability of weekend service, the cost of the fare, short walk to and from the bus stops, and then reliable service, having few late trips. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll, share the results. So this is actually very interesting. Every single person had a different answer, which we don't always see. We usually see people gravitate towards, a certain one. So I'm curious for, everyone, please do let us know in the chat why you answered the way that you did. So we got frequency of service, hours of operation, few transfers, availability of weekend service, and having reliable service. So very, very split results. So thank you everybody for your input. Next slide, please. So what we've heard from that survey conducted in 2022, we heard actually that the most important transit service enhancement that people requested was additional weekend service, chosen by 30% of respondents, followed by 21% said they want more frequent service, 18% said longer hours, and then the remaining 31% split amongst other choices. So as we talked about, riders, service declined significantly on weekends, and there may be a demand for additional weekend service. Next slide, please. There was also a non-rider survey conducted in 2022, and we learned that nearly 65% of Tucson residents believe that public transportation is very important, but they have not used public transit in the last year. So there's clearly a disconnect between people believing that transportation is an important part of a city, but they're not actually using those services themselves. 50% say that transit does not take them where they need to go, and that motivators that would encourage non-riders to use public transit are having travel time that's the same or less than traveling by car, if buses came more often, and if transit stops were located closer to their home, work, and other places. And so part of what we're going to try to do with the COA is make the system more attractive to non-riders, to encourage them to use some services by improving transit access and convenience, but also making sure we're responding to the needs of current riders as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so at this point, it's really where we get into the polls. We want to really understand what your priorities are for transit service in Greater Tucson. So we want to really understand your priorities for potential transit service improvements. There are some trade-offs when we're talking about transit design. For example, if speed is something that's really important to you, it's going to be hard to also have bus stops very frequently, because the more often the bus is stopping, the more that slows the bus down. So we want an understanding of whether it's more important to you to have a bus that stops pretty frequently, or one that can travel faster along the street. And so we're going to go through a series of questions, and they're really all spectrums. They're not absolutes. Every decision we make is going to be very context specific, depending on what part of the region we're in, what the local demographics and land use patterns are. But we just want a kind of gut sense of your priorities for what the transit system should look like. So next slide, please. So the first thing we want to talk about, and we're going to show two pictures of example scenarios, is sort of this frequency versus coverage discussion. In a frequency-based network, you're gonna focus on frequency. So you're gonna have a lot of routes that are operating every 15 minutes or less. So you can see in this example on the right that most routes are operating every 15 minutes or less, or every 15 to 30 minutes. The routes are a little bit farther apart, but you might have faster travel times between destinations. So compare this map to the one on the next slide, where this one prioritizes coverage. So you have fewer frequent routes, whereas everything on the last slide was pretty much a dark green. Now you've got a lot of yellows, a lot of oranges, services every 30 to 60 minutes. But you also notice that the routes are a lot closer together. There's a lot more coverage. You might have shorter walk distances to get to stops, and services a lot more localized. So on the next slide, we have a poll question. And so we want to know if you can rank on a scale of 1 to 5 where you stand on this trade-off between frequency and coverage. So a vote of 1, you want all the eggs in the frequency basket. You're investing more service on frequency on key corridors with high ridership. Whereas 5, you're looking at really investing in coverage, making sure everybody in the region has access to transit service. 3 would be a balance between both of them. And then 2 or 4 kind of mostly frequency, but with a little bit of coverage balance, whereas 4 would be mostly coverage with some frequency balance. And again, everything's going to be context specific when looking at making these choices. We'll wait about 10 more seconds for everyone to get their responses in. And then again, yeah, please use the chat to talk about why you gave the answers that you did. We also, on the website that Christy mentioned, TucsonCOA.com, there is a much more in-depth survey that has a lot of similar questions, but asks you a lot more about your individual trip and the types of service improvements you'd like to see. So just want a reminder that there is a much more involved survey where you can let us know a lot more about your individual trips. All right, going to end the poll, share the results. Okay, so the answers were pretty concentrated. So half said mostly frequency, half said a balance between both. So pretty balanced with a slight preference towards more frequency, since this is usually, one of the #1 requested improvements that we see. All right, next slide, please. So the next trade-off is between direct versus indirect service. So a less direct route might require fewer transfers because it's deviating into neighborhoods, kind of picking up people as it goes, and it has a shorter walk to stops by going kind of to the front door, by deviating closer to some of these destinations. But it increases the travel time because it takes longer when you're not traveling in a straight line. And because it has a longer travel time, the route might be able to, might have to operate less frequently. Versus a more direct service with few deviations from the main corridor. So you're moving in a straight line, you have a short travel time, service is faster, but you might not have as direct access to the service. You might have some long walks, but you'd have a shorter travel time and maybe a faster frequency or better frequency. Next slide, please. So this question is asking if you think that service should be faster, but riders may have longer walk access to service, or if we should prioritize having less direct service where service gets closer to the front doors of destinations, but might have longer travel times. Yeah, and these definitely are not easy questions. They're, always hard decisions to be made. So, okay, looks like everybody has responded. Again, almost perfectly balanced responses. Half said a balance between both, slight preference towards mostly direct service, but kind of balanced by that mostly less direct service too. Yeah, and thank you. Please do provide some context for your answers so that, you know, we kind of get a better understanding of why you answered the way that you did. All right, next slide, please. This one's similar, looking at speed versus access, but really related to stop spacing. So how frequently the bus stops along the street. So prioritizing access, you'll have stops that are closer together, which will shorten the walk distance between stops, but it slows down the trip for riders on the bus since the bus has to pull in and out of traffic a lot more frequently. Or you can prioritize speed and you'd have stops that are farther apart. So the bus can travel faster, but it might take a little bit longer to walk between the stops. And this graphic on the right is just showing that having stops spaced closer together doesn't necessarily significantly increase the amount of land that's within a quarter-mile walk of a transit stop. Basically just saying there's some diminishing returns on having too many stops along the street because they tend to overlap with their walk sheds. Okay, next slide, please. So this question is looking at how you balance speed versus access. So one is kind of focused on having bus stops farther apart with shorter travel times. 5 would be bus stops closer together with longer travel times. And we're really talking about, when we're talking about farther apart, we're talking about really a quarter mile, which is roughly a five minute walk, with City of Tucson having, you know, a half mile grid. It lends itself really well to that quarter mile spacing because you've got stops at all of the major intersections and then one intervening stop in between. All right, 10 more seconds for survey responses. Okay, so this one leaned a little bit more towards one side. So 2/3 said mostly faster speed. Mostly faster speed. And then with a couple of choices for balance between both and mostly closer access. So yeah, of course, we're not talking like, you know, miles between stops, but with that quarter mile, generally a quarter mile achieves that balance between not too long of a walk distance, but also not having the bus stop too frequently. All right. So we've got, I think, about 3 more of these poll questions, 3 or 4, and then we'll go into Q&A. So we also want a sense of time allocation. So when should SunTran be offering bus service? So the 2 charts on the right, the one at the top might look familiar from earlier in the presentation. We've added another line, which is gray, and the gray line shows the amount of service that SunTran's operating. So you can see that it's relatively flat throughout the day. As I said earlier, there's not a lot of peaking of service, relatively consistent service levels throughout the day with a pretty sharp drop off in the evenings. And then on weekends, weekends follow a similar patterns as to weekdays with a sharper drop off in the evenings. You can see on weekends too, though, that all trips compared to the Sun system trips are shifted later into the day. People are traveling earlier on transit and later on car trips. So we want to understand if bus service needs to be increased later into the evening as well to match when most people are traveling. Next slide. So with this poll question, you're choosing between continuing to focus service during weekdays from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. or adding service during the evenings and on weekends and focusing on kind of that 24/7 service. Probably not overnight, but at least, you know, later into the evenings and having more service on weekends. right, looks like everyone has responded. Okay, so again, one that's pretty clearly leaning towards one side. So half said a balance between both, and then half said kind of had a preference towards evenings and weekends, either mostly or all in on those. And I think this is consistent with what we've heard through the surveys as well. It's that there's that increased demand for more evening and weekend service. So the next slide is another poll. So what time of week do you feel it is most important for SunTran to provide longer hours? So not necessarily more frequency, but having service start earlier in the mornings or end later on the weekdays. And then if you could also let us know in the chat, what time is that for you? If it's later on weekend evenings, is that 8 p.m., 10 p.m., midnight? What does that later mean? It's helpful to have that context as well. And is that Saturdays and Sundays, just Saturdays? Is your travel different on Sundays compared to Saturdays? Any insight you have is helpful. All right. Okay, overwhelmingly, everyone pretty much said later on weekend evenings, and then one person said earlier on weekday mornings. And so I think, yeah, later on weekend evenings, again, is consistent with what we've heard through other outreach as well. So yeah, again, please say in the chat, what that means to you, or which routes, which part of the network, what types of destinations you're trying to get to, that you're not able to get to on weekend evenings. All that information is helpful. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so for the last poll question, we're looking at a trade-off between fixed route versus on-demand service. So over the last decade, we've seen the rise of on-demand shared ride mobility or microtransit services. This is like the Sun on-demand zones that were implemented a few years ago. And so it's like an Uber or a Lyft, but operated by the transit agency. You can request the trip on your phone or through a call center and basically go door to door within a certain zone. And so it's helpful in areas with lower densities where there's not a lot of people trying to get to and from the same places. And it can really increase the coverage of an area because it's not limited to a fixed route. But it does have a limited capacity because you can only carry a few people at a time since you're taking them to specific destinations. Whereas if you have a fixed route service with a route on a set alignment, set stops, set times, you can usually get higher ridership and there's schedule predictability, but it isn't able to cover as much territory because it has to follow a fixed line. So on the next slide, the poll question, we're asking specifically about areas where fixed route is less successful in either lower density areas or areas where there's not a lot of ridership. Do you think that SunTran should continue to invest in fixed route service in these areas or replace with alternative options like microtransit or dial-a-ride or a more on-demand type service? About 10 more seconds for us the answers to come through. All right. Okay, so over 50% said mostly alternative transit. And then the rest of the answers were pretty mixed between all traditional, mostly traditional, or balanced between both. And again, very curious to understand why you think that alternative transit's preferable, what attributes of that service you really like, what's appealing about that. So yeah, please let us know in the chats. All right, next slide, please. So in terms of next steps, so we're going to be using the results of the public outreach to guide the initial development of service recommendations. And then, as I mentioned earlier, those draft recommendations will be shared with the public later in 2023. And so, yeah, look out in the next couple of months for us to come back with some draft ideas. Next slide, please. So in order to provide some comments, we've got a number of different platforms. The first is, we'll have our Q&A. You're welcome to ask any questions or make any comments here in this forum. You can also go to the website, www.tucsoncoa.com. There's an interactive map where you can click on specific stops, specific locations, and leave a comment. I'd like more service here. We need a bus stop here, etc. We have an online survey I mentioned earlier with a lot more questions where you can tell us about your trip and the improvements you'd like to see. You can email suntraninfo@tucsonaz.gov. Call the numbers listed on the screen excuse me, or send a note to HDR in Phoenix. And then please, share all this information with your friends, your family, your coworkers, so that they can provide their input as well. The survey will be open for another 2 to 3 weeks through March 3rd. So for another couple of weeks. So please share this information. All right, next slide, please. All right, Christy.
All right. Thank you, Melissa. So we are moving into our official Q&A session. As a reminder, there's a couple of ways you can ask your question. So if you would like to just type your question into the chat, feel free to do so. You should see the chat at the bottom of your screen. You have that chat icon. Go ahead and click on that. You could type your question and we'll read it out loud to the group, and then our team will respond accordingly. If you would like to ask your question verbally, you can go ahead and give us that raised hand. You just have to click that reactions button and then click the raise hand button. It'll show us the raised hand. We'll request an unmute of your line, and then you can go ahead and unmute and ask your question verbally. Again, if you're a call-in only user, you can go ahead and press *9 on your phone. That'll give us that raised hand signal. And when we call your name, we'll request that you unmute, and then you'll have the opportunity to unmute your line by pressing *6, and then you can ask your question verbally. So with that, go ahead and start sending in your questions or raising your hands, and we will start going through the Q&A. Not seeing any questions come through, but we are sticking around till about 7 o'clock. So if you have any questions or you can think of anything, again, please feel free to raise that hand or go ahead and throw your question in the chat. We'll be monitoring that.
I would like to take a moment just to thank those who left comments and considerations in the chat. All comments we get for this project are very valuable, so we welcome any feedback, whether that be good or bad. That way we can try and improve the network based on what we're hearing from the community. So thank you for those who have left comments, who are attending. And as Christy and Melissa mentioned, please share this with neighbors, community members, anyone who uses our transit system, and folks who don't, because we want to hear from the entire community to see how we can make this resource better for everyone. So thank you.
Thanks, James. I did see a question come through from Carrie Hale. Is there any consideration for the sun safety of bus stops? So many, even sheltered stops, have effectively zero shade.
So thank you, Carrie. we, as part of this COA operations, we will be inventorying all of our assets related to our transit stops. And with that, there'll be a prioritization to try and help us improve, whether that be adding shade structures or seating or other improvements, accessibility related to those stops. So it's not something we have planned out right now, but we will be accounting for those assets as part of this project, and then hopefully get prioritization of those moving forward, so we'll be able to do some work towards that.
Thank you, James. We do have another question in the chat. R. Johnson asked, are there considerations for transit out to public lands / state and national parks surrounding Tucson? Tucson Mountain Park, Saguaro East / West, Sabino Canyon, etc.
Thank you for that question. That's a great question. And basically within the scope of the COA, we're going to be considering all regional destinations as a part of this. So we will be taking into consideration traffic flows and movement throughout the region, including to our national parks, because we know those are highly used spots and great locations. So those will be considered within the scope, yes.
Thanks, James. As a reminder, you can go ahead and place those questions in the chat. The chat should be at the bottom of your screen. There's a little chat icon. You can go ahead and click that, open it up and type your question in. If you would like to ask a question verbally, you can go ahead and use that raised hand icon. We can call on your name and ask that you unmute your line, and then you can ask your question verbally at that time. Again, if you are a call-in only user, you can also ask your question verbally. You just need to press *9 on your phone. That gives us that raised hand again. We can let you know that you are up in the queue and allow you to talk. And then all you have to do is press *6 on your phone to unmute your line. And again, we'll be here till about 7 p.m. So you can stick around if you just want to sit and think about your questions. We've got some time, so no rush there. Not seeing any questions coming through just yet, but we'll stick around and keep an eye out.
And just another reminder, as Christy mentioned, these meetings are recorded and we will be posting them to the COA website. That's again, www.tucsoncoa.com. So I know it's sometimes difficult to make meetings late nights, evenings. Everyone has very different schedules. So we will be posting these public meetings on the website for folks to be able to look at them at their discretion.
Yes, thank you, James. And we did put that in the chat. So the link to that online meeting is in the chat. We also have a direct link to the survey. Now that you've heard the presentation, you can get a direct link to that survey and go ahead and head over there and take the survey. This is a new survey. Carrie, I see your question. Is a survey the same that was available before? This survey did launch just a few weeks ago. I know there have been several surveys coming through, the writer and non-writer surveys from SunTran, but this one launched late January, so I think January 24th. So if you've taken that survey already, then yes, but if you haven't taken any in the last few weeks, it is different. All right, I do see a question in the chat from Grace. A good website link to find routes. Cindy or maybe Luce, could you guys pop that link in the chat for folks? I do have another question that came through from R. Johnson. How do we improve visibility of bus stops? Many stops with a single sign, many bus stops with a single sign or are poorly lit, resulting in buses passing stops at dawn, dusk, and at night.
That's a great question. And again, as part of this effort, we will be inventorying bus stops, looking for things like lighting and other improvements. So as funds become available, we'll be able to use that kind of inventory to prioritize those features. In addition, the city has, within the transportation department, working on improving safety features across the city. So the hope is that with some of the ongoing projects, whether they're funded by RTA or local City of Tucson sales taxes, some of those safety improvements will come by way of those other funding mechanisms. But as part of this COA specifically, it'll be really looking at those assets and seeing where we can prioritize the funds that we have to help with those safety and bus improvements, recognizing they're very important for transit users, especially shade structures and lighting, as you said, for safety reasons.
Thanks, James. And Grace, we did put that in the chat, so you should be able to see the routes and services in there. Again, just a reminder, you can ask your questions here live, but you can also visit that website. There's a general comment form. There's a comment map if you'd like to place any questions or provide any comments on any specific locations. You can go ahead and drop a pin on that map and provide your comment there. And then we also have that survey for you to take. So there's plenty of time in the next several weeks. If you want to think about this a little bit more and provide some comments, you still have plenty of time to give that feedback. And post-meeting, if you're looking for any of this information, SunTran has continuously posted this on their social media channels. So you can go on there also and find direct links to things through their social media channels at any time.
So we're not seeing any additional questions, but I just wanted to take one last moment to thank those of you who showed up. Again, thank you to the project team and the community at large. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate all input that you have regarding our transit system. And again, if you have others that you think would benefit from this, please feel free to share and spread the word. We really appreciate it because we want to do make the most out of this great opportunity we have to improve our transit system. So thank you again. Again, the project team will be sticking around till 7. If you have any other questions you can think of that come up in the next few minutes, we'll be here. But just wanted to say thank you on behalf of the city and our partners across the region, and have a great evening. Thank you.
James, I did have another question come through. Does the Department of Transportation coordinate with Sun Tran on crosswalk locations? Any thoughts on improving crossing options between bus stops? Mid-block crossings are a high pedestrian accident / fatality occurrence.
Yes, great question. So we do coordinate very closely with our traffic engineering division at DTM anytime new bus stops are installed, recognizing that those crosswalk facilities are very important to safety reasons, safety implements for these. So yes, there is a lot of coordination that happens regarding the bus stops with our traffic engineering division at DTM. Looks like it's about 7 o'clock. So if there are no other questions, I just wanted to thank everyone again for showing up tonight, and please welcome any feedback you have moving forward. Thank you again. Have a great evening.